My family mocked my pathetic salary while bragging about their $95,000 resort membership. They didn't know I owned the entire $110 million property. And wet ass, for 25 agonizing years of my life, I was the invisible son, the designated failure in a family that worshipped nothing but aggressive ambition, ruthless dominance, and flashy, unearned wealth. The absolute peak of this lifelong disrespect happened just 3 years ago, when my golden child brother laughed in my face at a luxury mountain resort, mocking my cheap clothes and bragging about his exclusive $95,000 VIP membership to his millionaire friends. But there was one massive, world-shattering detail they did not know. His desperately padded membership application had to be manually approved by me, because I didn't just have a guest pass to this ultra-exclusive $110 million paradise. I owned every single inch of it, lock, stock, and barrel. I am Elias. I am 32 years old, and to truly understand the sheer, intoxicating satisfaction of the absolute destruction I rained down on my family's egos, you have to understand the toxic, suffocating soil I was forced to grow up in. My father, Arthur, was a self-made man who ran a highly successful, cutthroat commercial real estate investment firm in Denver. He was a man who respected dominance, aggression, loud confidence, and a shark-like mentality. He viewed life as a zero-sum game. If you weren't actively crushing your competition, you were losing. My mother, Eleanor, was a quintessential suburban socialite who measured a human being's worth entirely by their zip code, the designer tags on their tailored clothes, and the exclusivity of their country club memberships. And then there was my older brother, Tristan. Tristan was the golden child. 3 years older than me, he was loud, fiercely charismatic, and aggressively mediocre at absolutely everything he ever attempted. But he executed his mediocrity with so much unearned confidence and staggering entitlement that my parents somehow constantly mistook his blatant arrogance for sheer genius. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one. I liked to observe the room, I read heavy books. I analyzed complex systems, I built things with my hands, and I did not demand the spotlight at the dinner table. In my father's eyes, being quiet was a fatal flaw for a man. It meant weakness. It meant you were prey in a world of predators. The division in our household started incredibly early, planting deep seeds of resentment that would take decades to uproot. I vividly remember being 8 years old. Tristan was 11. My father came home one evening smelling of expensive scotch and imported cigars, proudly announcing he had purchased a junior golf membership for Tristan at the prestigious Cherry Hills Country Club. It cost $15,000 a year, and that did not even include the custom-fitted titanium clubs, the private weekly coaching sessions with a former PGA pro, and the ridiculous, preppy plaid outfits my mother bought him. Tristan is a natural, my father said over a dinner of expensive roast beef, beaming at my brother like he had just cured a terrible disease. He has the swing of a future champion. The right coaching is going to put him on the map. I looked down at my plate, my heart pounding in my chest, gathering my courage. Dad, can I try golf, too? I want to take lessons with Tristan. My mother reached over and patted my hand with a sickeningly pitying smile. Oh, Elias, honey, golf is very expensive, and Tristan has a real God-given talent for it. You are more of a bookworm. You don't have the competitive fire for sports. Why don't you stick to the public library? Reading is free. I did not stick to the library. I joined the local YMCA swim team. It cost $95 for the entire competitive season. I paid for it myself using money I saved from doing heavy yard work for our elderly neighbors, pulling thick weeds until my hands blistered and bled. The chlorine smell at the Y was overpowering. The locker rooms were always damp, smelling faintly of mildew, and the water was always slightly too cold, but I trained relentlessly. I channeled all my silent frustration into the water. I won the regional butterfly stroke championship 2 years in a row. My parents never attended a single one of my meets. They were always too busy driving Tristan to out-of-state junior golf tournaments, where he consistently placed in the middle of the pack, always loudly blaming the wind, the sun, or his caddy for his endless failures. When it came time for high school, the divide widened into an uncrossable canyon. My father took Tristan on a grand tour of prestigious prep schools across 3 states. They stayed in luxury hotels, ate at 5-star steakhouses, and met with elite headmasters. Tristan eventually chose Wellington Prep. The tuition was $55,000 a year, and that did not even cover his room and board, his tailored uniforms, or his mandatory winter ski trips to the Swiss Alps. Only the best for our son, my father announced at Thanksgiving dinner that year, raising a glass of expensive bourbon to the extended family. This is an investment in excellence. Tristan is building his network. He is shaking hands with the future leaders of this country. When I turned 16, my parents did not take me on a tour. There were no luxury hotel stays, no campus visits, no handshakes with headmasters. My mother simply handed me the dog-eared enrollment forms for the local, overcrowded public high school, and told me to forge my father's signature because he was too busy closing a deal. You will get a perfectly good education there, she said, not even looking up from her fashion magazine. Not everyone needs a fancy school, Elias. We have to be practical with our finances. Besides, you're smart. You'll figure it out. I did figure it out. I graduated valedictorian of my massive public high school. I maintained a flawless 4 gigapascals while working 20 hours a week bagging groceries and pushing carts at a local Target. I stood on the stage in a cheap, static-filled polyester gown and gave a speech to 2,000 people about overcoming adversity. I looked out into the massive crowd, scanning the sea of faces for my family. They were not there. My father had decided that Tristan's intramural college rugby tournament was a much more pressing family obligation. Tristan's team lost terribly in the first round. I went home after graduation, took off my gown, and ate a slice of cold, leftover pizza entirely alone in the dark kitchen. That was my grand celebration. I paid my own way through a state college with academic scholarships, federal grants, and grinding, soul-crushing night shifts at a local 24/7 diner, serving drunk college kids at 3 in the morning while smelling of stale grease. I earned a degree in hospitality and business management, graduating at the absolute top of my class. Tristan, meanwhile, took 6 grueling years to finish his basic business communications degree, partying away a massive college fund, and barely scraping by with a C, average. But the stark, undeniable reality of my family's blatant favoritism hit me like a runaway freight train the day after Tristan finally managed to graduate. My father threw a massive, catered party at the country club and handed him a vice president title at his commercial real estate firm. He gave him a starting salary of $130,000, full executive medical benefits, a matched $401k, and the keys to a brand new, jet black Mercedes-Benz. Tristan needs to learn the business from the top down, my father explained to our deeply impressed relatives, clapping my brother on the back. He is a born leader. He is going to run this real estate empire someday. 2 months later, armed with my stellar GPA and a resume packed with actual, grueling work experience, I sat across from my father in his dark oak, leather-scented executive office. I handed him my pristine resume and asked if there was a junior analyst, property manager, or even an entry-level administrative position available for me at the company. I told him I was willing to start at the absolute bottom. I didn't want a Mercedes. I didn't want a shiny VP title. I just wanted a fair chance to prove my worth. My father looked at my resume for exactly 3 seconds before sliding it back across the massive mahogany desk. He looked deeply uncomfortable, almost annoyed that I had dared to put him in this position. Elias, look, he sighed, leaning back in his expensive leather chair and steepling his fingers. We do not really have anything at your level right now. Commercial real estate is an aggressive, cutthroat, male-dominated industry. You need to be a shark. You need to be willing to bleed the competition dry. You are too quiet, Elias. You are too soft-spoken. Why don't you get some experience elsewhere first? Work your way up. Learn the ropes of the real world before you try to play in the big leagues. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth physically ached. Tristan had 0 corporate experience when you made him vice president. He didn't even have good grades. He spent 6 years drinking. My father's face darkened instantly, his eyes narrowing into hostile slits. That is entirely different, and I do not appreciate your disrespectful tone. Tristan is being groomed for executive leadership. He has the alpha personality for it. He commands a room when he walks in. I am just being realistic about your prospects, Elias. You need to set your expectations accordingly, so you don't end up disappointed and bitter. I walked out of his office with my resume crushed in my fist. I did not argue. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. I just realized with absolute, chilling clarity that I was entirely on my own in this world. I would never get a handout. I would never get a leg up. If I wanted an empire, I would have to build it from the mud up, with my bare hands. I took a job as a front desk clerk at a mid-tier Grand Hyatt hotel. My starting salary was $32,000 a year. While Tristan was driving his Mercedes to 3 martini client lunches and expensing $1,000 steak dinners on the company card, I was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester uniform, dealing with angry guests complaining about broken ice machines at 3 in the morning. The ultimate humiliation, the real triggering event that set my entire future in motion, came on my 26th birthday. My mother insisted on a family dinner to celebrate. She booked a table at an upscale, wildly expensive steakhouse downtown. It was Tristan's favorite restaurant, chosen by Tristan, and paid for by my father. We sat in a lavish private dining room. My uncle Vance and my cousin Beatrice were there. Beatrice was an absolute master of passive-aggressive sympathy. She loved to highlight my perceived failures under the guise of caring deeply about my well-being. She was a venomous snake draped in designer clothing. So, Elias, Uncle Vance boomed loudly, slicing into a massive, bloody ribeye steak, are you still working the front desk at that hotel, carrying heavy bags for people? Fetching extra towels for the tourists? I am a shift supervisor now, actually, I said evenly, keeping my eyes firmly on my plate. Beatrice reached over and gave me a sad, overly sympathetic smile, dripping with fake sweetness. That is so incredibly sweet, Elias. It really is honest work. You must meet a lot of interesting people working the night shift. It is good that you found something low stress that fits your quiet personality. Oh, that is nice, Vance said dismissively, waving his heavy silver fork. He immediately turned his attention to my brother. And Tristan, my boy, I heard through the grapevine you closed that massive commercial deal in Boulder. Tell me all about it. Tristan wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, grinning like he had just conquered a small nation. Yeah, a 14-unit commercial complex. A $10.5 million acquisition. Dad is letting me run point on the entire integration. It was a tough negotiation, but I bullied them into our terms. I squeezed them until they broke. Excellent, excellent. Vance praised, raising his glass of expensive red wine. He then turned back to me with a condescending, pitying smirk. You know, Elias, there is absolutely no shame in regular hourly work. The world needs hotel staff just as much as it needs executives. Not everyone can be a high achiever like your brother. We all have our limits, and it's good you've accepted yours. My mother nodded enthusiastically in agreement, entirely oblivious to the cruelty of the statement. Exactly, Vance. We are just so happy Elias is able to pay his rent on time and stay out of trouble. I gripped my steak knife under the heavy white tablecloth until my knuckles turned stark white. I looked around the lavish room. My father was beaming at Tristan with unadulterated, glowing pride. My mother was making pathetic excuses for my existence. Beatrice was hiding a malicious smirk behind her crystal wine glass. They had completely, totally written me off. They had decided my absolute ceiling in life was a $32,000 salary, and they were perfectly comfortable keeping me there forever. I was nothing but a convenient measuring stick to make Tristan look taller. I set my knife down very carefully. The sharp clink of the metal against the fine china silenced the table. I looked Uncle Vance dead in the eye, my gaze cold and completely hollow. You are right, Vance, I said quietly, my voice eerily calm. Not everyone can. Tristan let out a loud, snorting laugh. It was the exact same grating laugh he would use years later by the pool. That night, walking to my beat-up, 10-year-old Toyota sedan in the freezing, snow-covered parking lot, I made a silent, ironclad vow. I was going to build an empire so massive, so incredibly wealthy and powerful, that it would cast a permanent, suffocating shadow over absolutely everything my father and brother ever touched. I was going to make them choke on their pity. I thought making that decision was the hardest part. I thought the burning anger would sustain me. I was so incredibly wrong. The real storm, the brutal, exhausting, soul-crushing work of building generational wealth from absolutely nothing was just beginning. Update 1. What my family never bothered to understand, what they were too blinded by their own arrogance to see, was that I was not just working at the Hyatt to collect a meager paycheck and pay my rent. I was studying it. I was dissecting the entire hospitality machine from the inside out. I looked at every single system, every staffing schedule, every supply chain inefficiency, every vendor contract, and every single guest complaint that crossed my desk. While Tristan was playing golf on company time and pretending to understand complex commercial leases, I was in the trenches analyzing massive revenue streams and operational failures. When I was 26, I noticed the hotel was bleeding money on its main restaurant. The space was gorgeous, overlooking the city skyline, but the execution was an absolute disaster. The menu was bloated with outdated dishes, the food waste was astronomical, and the kitchen staff was deeply unmotivated. I spent 3 weeks of my own time, staying up until 4 a.m. after my graveyard shifts, writing a 50-page, meticulously researched proposal. I outlined a comprehensive plan to outsource the kitchen management to a renowned, hungry local chef, streamline the menu to high margin, locally sourced items, and completely overhaul the dynamic pricing structure. I didn't hand this to my direct supervisor. I knew he would steal the credit. I bypassed the chain of command entirely and slipped the heavy proposal directly onto the desk of Donovan, the general manager. Donovan was a hard-nosed, cynical veteran of the hospitality industry who suffered no fools and cared only about numbers. He read my proposal. He didn't fire me for insubordination. Instead, he implemented the entire plan the very next week. Within 3 months, the restaurant's revenue increased by a staggering 52%. The profit margin skyrocketed. Donovan called me into his spacious office, poured me a cup of black coffee, and looked at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. Elias, he said gruffly, tapping my printed proposal. You are not just good at this. You are exceptional. Your mind works like a Swiss watch. Have you ever thought about corporate consulting? You're wasting your life behind that front desk. At 27, the morning after that miserable, humiliating birthday dinner with my family, I walked straight into Donovan's office and handed in my resignation. I took the $40,000 I had painstakingly saved over years of frugal living, eating ramen, and driving a car with a broken heater, and I registered an LLC, Thorn Hospitality Solutions. My very first client was a struggling bed and breakfast in Taos, New Mexico. The elderly owners were 90 days away from total bankruptcy and facing a brutal foreclosure lawsuit from the bank. I lived in a tiny, unheated spare room on their property for a month. I tore their entire operation down to the studs. I redesigned their guest experience, fired their toxic, embezzling manager, and restructured their pricing model to capture the luxury weekend market. In 3 months, they went from bleeding red to highly profitable. They paid me a consulting fee of $12,000 and, more importantly, referred me to 2 other desperate property owners in their network. By the time I was 28, I was managing 12 consulting clients simultaneously. I was working 100-hour weeks, but I was making $160,000 a year in consulting fees alone. I was out earning Tristan's inflated salary, but I kept my mouth completely shut. Consulting was just the stepping stone. I didn't want to advise wealthy owners on how to fix their broken toys. I wanted to be the owner. I wanted the massive equity. I found the perfect target, a 30-room boutique hotel in Sedona. It was a stunning historic property with incredible bones, but it was being driven straight into the ground by wildly incompetent management and a bitter divorce between the owners. Occupancy was hovering at a dismal 28%. They were bleeding cash, fielding lawsuits from vendors, and headed straight for the auction block. The asking price was $3.2 million. I took every single dollar I had ever earned, $900,000 in pure liquid cash, put it down as a massive deposit, and secured a commercial loan for the rest. I leveraged my entire life, my entire future, on this one dilapidated property. Somehow, the news made its way back to my family. Beatrice, my dear meddling cousin, had apparently seen a public real estate filing and sprinted to tell my parents. My mother called me on a Tuesday night. She didn't call to congratulate me on taking a massive entrepreneurial leap. She called in an absolute panic. "Elias? What on earth are you doing?" "Elias," she demanded, her voice shrill and laced with genuine horror. "Beatrice told me you took out a massive commercial loan to buy some ruined, rat-infested hotel in Sedona. Are you completely out of your mind? You do not have the experience for this. Tristan says the commercial real estate market is absolutely brutal right now. He says you are going to bankrupt yourself and destroy the family name." "I know exactly what I am doing, Mom," I said calmly, looking at the peeling floral wallpaper of the lobby I now legally owned. "What if you fail?" She pressed, her tongue dripping with that familiar, suffocating toxic doubt. "You will ruin your credit forever. You will have absolutely nothing. Your father is furious that you are taking such reckless financial risks without consulting him. He says you are playing businessman and it's going to end in tears." I did not ask for his money, I did not ask for a handout, and I certainly do not need his advice, I replied, my voice turning to ice. "I have to get back to work, I have a hotel to run." I hung up the phone. The profound betrayal was not just that they doubted my business acumen. It was that they actively, desperately rooted for my failure. They needed me to fail to validate their own narrative of who I was supposed to be. I used that anger as rocket fuel. I slept on a bare mattress on the floor of an unrenovated room that smelled of mildew. I personally interviewed and retrained every single staff member. I fired the lazy ones and promoted the hungry ones. In 11 grueling months, the hotel's occupancy hit 89%, revenue increased by 380%. The property was suddenly a cash-printing gold mine. I approached the bank, refinanced the hotel at its new, massively higher valuation, and pulled out $1.5 million in tax-free equity. I didn't buy a Mercedes. I didn't buy designer clothes. I used that money to buy a second failing property in Santa Fe, then a third in Denver, then a fourth in Park City. By the time I turned 31, I owned 7 highly profitable luxury boutique hotels across the West. My total portfolio value sat at a staggering $155 million. I built a private, ruthless management firm, Obsidian Capital Management, with 18 corporate employees who ran the day-to-day operations of my properties. And my family? They still genuinely thought I was a mid-level shift manager struggling to pay a mortgage on a condo. Then the absolute crown jewel appeared on the market, Crimson Peak Resort in the Rocky Mountains. It was a sprawling, majestic 150-acre property with a championship golf course, a massive spa, 3 restaurants, and 200 rooms. But it had gone spectacularly bankrupt. 3 previous wealthy owners had tried to save it and failed, bleeding millions in the process. The bank wanted $38 million just to clear the debt. The entire industry thought it was a cursed, toxic asset. I spent 3 days walking the grounds entirely alone in the freezing snow. I looked past the rot, the overgrown greens, and the empty pools. I saw a hyper-exclusive, ultra-luxury, members-only destination. I saw a gold mine. I made a ruthless, aggressive offer, $32 million with $10 million down in liquid cash. The bank was so desperate to offload the toxic asset, they accepted. I poured $14 million of my own capital into aggressive renovations. I ripped out the old restaurants, built a world-class thermal spa, and redesigned the golf course to PGA standards. I rebranded it. I set the membership fee at an outrageous $95,000 specifically to create an aura of absolute, undeniable exclusivity. In the first year alone, I sold 400 memberships to politicians, CEOs, and old money families. Crimson Peak was officially valued at $110 million. My empire was complete, but the ultimate test, the true climax of my life's work, was still looming on the horizon. 3 years after the grand reopening, the text message arrived. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my corner office in Denver reviewing the quarterly earnings reports when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was my mother. Elias, the whole family is gathering for your father's 66th birthday, July 20th to 22nd. We are going to a very exclusive, incredibly fancy place called Crimson Peak Resort. You should definitely come if you can get the time off work. Tristan is treating everyone. He is a VIP member there now. Let me know so I can ask them to squeeze you into one of the standard rooms. I know how tight your budget is. I stared at the glowing screen for a full 5 minutes. The cosmic irony of the situation was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Tristan, the golden boy, was treating the family using a membership my father had likely paid for, at a resort that I owned lock, stock, and barrel. He was coming to flex his borrowed wealth inside my kingdom. I opened my laptop and logged securely into the resort's private back-end administrative system. I searched the membership registry. There it was. Tristan Thorne. I pulled up his file. He had applied 20 months ago. His application had sat in the pending file for over a year because his personal financials were laughably unimpressive, heavily padded by his father's company assets rather than personal liquidity. My membership committee had finally approved him 8 months ago purely to fill a low-tier quota for younger demographics to keep the club from looking like a retirement home. I checked the reservation system. Tristan had booked the executive villa for 3 nights plus a premium poolside cabana reservation for Saturday afternoon. Total bill, nearly $14,000 for the weekend. I picked up my phone and texted my mother back, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. I will be there. Do not worry about booking a room for me. I will make my own arrangements. I then picked up my desk phone and dialed Sterling, my incredibly sharp resort director. Sterling, I said as soon as he answered, I am coming up this weekend. Prepare the owner's compound for me. Ensure the pantry is stocked. The owner's compound was a private, 5,000 square foot luxury residence hidden safely behind a dense line of mature pine trees on the far edge of the property. It had its own private gated driveway, a massive stone fireplace, and a private plunge pool overlooking the valley. It was never rented to guests. It belonged exclusively to me. Right away, Mr. Thorne, Sterling said efficiently. Shall I arrange a formal greeting team for your arrival? No, I replied, leaning back in my chair. I am traveling strictly incognito this weekend. My family will be checking in on Friday under the name Tristan Thorne. I want you to treat them exactly like any other guest. No special favors, no VIP upgrades. And Sterling, this is crucial. Under absolutely no circumstances is anyone on staff to know or mention that I own the property until I explicitly say so. If anyone asks, I am just a guest. I drove up on a Friday afternoon in my unassuming, 6-year-old daily driver, specifically avoiding the fleet of exotic cars in my garage. I checked into my residence through a biometric side door. I unpacked my bags, changed into a simple, unbranded linen shirt, a pair of casual shorts, and sandals. I grabbed a paperback book, slipped on my sunglasses, and began the short walk down the winding stone path toward the main infinity pool. I knew exactly what I was walking into. As I approached the pool area, the sounds of splashing water and clinking glasses filled the air. I saw them immediately. The cascading infinity pool was a masterpiece of modern landscape architecture, featuring imported black volcanic stone that perfectly reflected the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. My father was reclining on a premium lounger, holding court like a king. My mother was beside him, draped in a designer cover-up. Beatrice and Uncle Vance were sipping expensive champagne. And Tristan was standing near the water's edge with 3 of his finance bros, holding the keys to his Mercedes, acting like he owned the entire world. I bypassed my family entirely, walking around the perimeter of the pool. I deliberately chose a lounger on the far side, perfectly positioned in the shade. It was strategic, close enough to hear every single word they said, but far enough away to force them to raise their voices. I sat down, opened my book, and waited. My mother was the first to finally notice I had arrived. She adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and waved a manicured hand in my direction. She did not get up to greet me. I placed a leather bookmark in my book and walked slowly over to their cluster of premium cabana loungers. Elias, sweetie, you actually made it, my mother said, offering her right cheek for a rigid air kiss. She immediately ran her critical eyes up and down my unbranded linen shirt. I could practically see the mental calculator in her head tallying up the cheap retail cost of my outfit. I am so glad you could get the time off work. Did your shift manager give you a hard time? I manage my own schedule these days, I replied evenly. Beatrice practically slithered over, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne that I knew for a fact retailed for $250 a bottle at my resort bar. "Elias, it is so tremendously brave of you to come up here," she said, her voice dripping with toxic sweetness. "I know places like this can be a little intimidating when you aren't used to the luxury scene. If you need me to cover your lunch or your bar tab, just let me know. I do not want you putting an $18 sandwich on a high-interest credit card. We take care of our own. In the Sessin, the Dest, that is really a sandwich on Heidset in fact. I deeply appreciate your concern for my financial well-being, Beatrice," I said, my voice as smooth and cold as glass. "But I think I can handle the cost of a sandwich today." My father briefly glanced in my direction, gave a sharp, dismissive nod that you might give to a valet driver, and immediately returned his full attention to Tristan. The commercial real estate market in the Denver metropolitan area is ripe for a hostile takeover, my father was saying loudly to Tristan's friends. Tristan here is spearheading a massive new development project. We are looking at a $60 million portfolio expansion by the fourth quarter. It takes aggressive leadership. It takes a shark mentality to outbid the corporate funds. Tristan soaked up the unearned praise like a dry sponge. He leaned against the stone pillar of the cabana, twirling his keys. "It is all about leverage, Dad. You have to find the distressed assets, squeeze the desperate owners until they break, and take the equity for pennies on the dollar. Emotional people lose money, cold people make empires." I stood there, listening to them regurgitate buzzwords they had read in a generic business magazine. The absolute mind-bending irony of Tristan talking about distressed assets and leverage while standing on the multi-million-dollar distressed asset I had personally leveraged, acquired, and transformed was almost too delicious to bear. "Speaking of leverage," Tristan said, suddenly turning his attention to me with a predatory, mocking grin. "Elias, glad you could join us in the big leagues. I hope the guest pass didn't give you too much trouble at the front gate. They screen out the riffraff to protect the membership experience here. Listen, we are doing a massive steak dinner tonight at the Reserve restaurant. It is a strict dress code. Jackets are absolutely required. Do you actually own a tailored jacket? Or do I need to float you a short-term loan so you can buy some decent clothes to fit in?" "I brought a jacket," I said, keeping my face a completely blank slate. I excused myself from the cabana and walked slowly back to my lounger on the far side of the pool. I sat down, picked up my book, and watched them from a distance. The trap was fully set. 10 minutes later, Tristan's loud, grating voice carried over the water again. He was loudly complaining to a young server, a bright woman named Chloe, whom I had personally promoted, that his drink was not mixed with the specific ultra-premium vodka he had requested. He was being incredibly rude, condescending, and arrogant, pointing a finger in her face. "You really have to watch these hourly wage people," Tristan said to his friends, shaking his head in disgust as Chloe walked away, maintaining her professional composure exactly as I had trained her. "If you do not stay on top of the staff, the service slips immediately. I might have to have a serious word with the upper management about their pathetic hiring standards." I closed my book. I set it down very carefully on the small teak table next to my lounger. The time for silent observation was officially over. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, opened my encrypted messaging app, and sent a single one-word text message to Sterling: "Execute. Update 2. The transformation of the atmosphere around the pool was almost instantaneous. A heavy, palpable silence seemed to roll across the deck like a fog rolling in from the ocean as Sterling, my impeccably dressed resort director, stepped out from the shaded archway of the main administrative lobby. He walked with total, undeniable purpose, a sleek silver tablet tucked under his arm. The director of finance and the chief architect followed slightly behind him, carrying thick, rolled-up blueprints and leather portfolios. They did not walk toward Tristan's cabana. They did not walk toward my father. They walked with absolute, unwavering, military-like precision directly toward my solitary lounger on the far side of the pool. The sudden, coordinated movement caught Tristan's eye immediately. He stopped his loud complaining and turned his body to watch. My father lowered his expensive sunglasses, a frown creasing his forehead. Beatrice sat up completely straight, her champagne flute frozen inches from her lips. They all watched in stunned silence as the highest-ranking executive of the $110 million resort bypassed the entire VIP section to approach the family disappointment. Sterling stopped exactly 3 feet from my chair. The 2 senior department heads stopped 1 step behind him. They stood at attention, projecting absolute deference. "Sir," Sterling said, his voice carrying perfectly across the quiet, sparkling water. It was not the voice of a hospitality manager speaking to a random guest. It was the voice of a 5-star general reporting directly to his king. "I sincerely apologize for the interruption of your afternoon rest, but the architectural team has finalized the expansion plans. The City Planning Commission is currently holding on line 1 in my office. They are urgently requesting your final signature for approval before the 3 p.m. municipal deadline." I did not rush. I took my absolute time. I picked up my sunglasses, folded the arms slowly, and placed them neatly on the teak table. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tristan take a tentative step forward, his brow furrowed in deep, uncomprehending confusion. "Let me see the full renderings, Sterling," I said, my voice steady, calm, and carrying an undeniable heavy weight of authority that my family had never heard before. Sterling handed me the tablet with both hands. I swiped slowly through the highly detailed digital blueprints for the new wellness spa wing and the massive corporate conference center. The total budget confirmation stands firm at $28.5 million for all construction phases? I asked. "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Sterling replied instantly. "The financing is already locked in through our private banking partners." "Excellent work. Tell the contractors to break ground on phase 1 on Monday morning at dawn." I signed my name on the digital document with my finger and handed the tablet back to him. "Of course, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, taking the device respectfully. "Also, the governor's office called 20 minutes ago. They want to confirm your VIP attendance at the charity gala next month in Denver and discuss your financial pledge for the new statewide education initiative." "Confirm my attendance immediately," I said casually, looking out over the cascading waterfalls. "I will increase my pledge from last year, make it $125,000. Tell my personal accountant to wire the funds directly to their foundation by Friday afternoon." "Consider it done, sir. Is there absolutely anything else you require at this moment?" "That will be all for now, Sterling. Thank you." Sterling offered a deep, highly respectful bow. The two department heads mirrored the gesture perfectly. They turned sharply on their heels, and walked back toward the administrative lobby, leaving an absolute, deafening silence in their wake. I slowly turned my head and looked directly across the pool. Tristan was completely frozen. His mouth was hanging slightly open. His cocktail glass tipped precariously in his trembling hand, liquor spilling onto his designer shoes. His friends were staring at me like I had just descended from a glowing alien spacecraft. My father had physically stood up from his premium lounger, his face completely pale, his jaw working up and down but producing absolutely no sound. "Elias," my father finally managed to choke out. His voice was entirely stripped of its usual booming, arrogant authority. It sounded incredibly thin, weak, and pathetic. I stood up from my lounger. I smoothed the minor wrinkles from my linen shirt, slipped my hands casually into my pockets, and walked slowly, deliberately, around the edge of the pool toward their cabana. Every single eye in the vicinity was locked entirely onto me. "Yes, Dad?" I answered politely as I approached their paralyzed group. Tristan stepped forward. His face flushed a deep, ugly red with a sudden, panicked, defensive anger. "What the hell was that? Who was that guy? Why did he call you Mr. Thorne, with so much respect? Why is he showing you high-level corporate blueprints for this place? Are you running some kind of elaborate scam?" "That was Sterling," I said smoothly, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "He is the resort director. He was showing me the blueprints because I needed to personally approve the $28.5 million expansion budget." Beatrice let out a high-pitched, incredibly nervous laugh, trying desperately to cling to the reality she understood. "Elias, please stop playing around. Did you bribe a staff member to come over here and put on a little theatrical show for us to make yourself look important? That is honestly pathetic, even for you. You don't have $28 million. You work at a front desk." I looked at Beatrice. I didn't smile. My gaze was so utterly cold and piercing that her nervous laugh died instantly in her throat. She shrank back into her chair. "I am not playing around, Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute, terrifying finality. I turned my attention back to my father, then slowly to my brother. I looked them dead in the eye, stripping away 25 years of their delusions in a single breath. "I do not work at this resort. I do not have a pity guest pass. And I certainly did not need anyone in this family to pull favors to get me through the front gate." "Then what are you doing here?" Tristan demanded, his voice cracking slightly, the panic fully setting in. "I own it," I said. The three words hit the group like a physical shockwave from a bomb blast. Tristan physically recoiled, stepping back so fast he tripped over his own feet and bumped hard into a heavy cocktail table. The glass in his hand slipped from his sweaty grip and shattered into a dozen pieces on the stone deck, vodka and ice spraying everywhere. A server immediately materialized from the shadows to clean it up, ignoring Tristan entirely, giving me a quick, deeply deferential nod, and vanishing again. You own what?" my father stammered, gripping the edge of the heavy stone cabana as if the ground had suddenly violently tilted beneath his feet. "I own the Crimson Peak Resort," I stated clearly, letting the heavy reality crush the air completely out of their lungs. "I bought this entire property 3 years ago out of a messy bankruptcy for $32 million. I personally funded a $14 million renovation out of my own pocket. The current market valuation of this property, as of the audit last quarter, is $110 million. We have over 400 VIP members who pay $15,000 annually, not including the $95,000 initiation fees. I also own 6 other highly profitable luxury boutique hotels across the West. My total real estate portfolio value is approximately $155 million. I built a private corporate management firm to run them all. Crimson Peak is just my flagship property. You are standing in my house. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Tristan's friends were slowly, quietly inching away toward the bar, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic humiliation unfolding in front of them. Tristan practically collapsed into one of the plush, oversized lounge chairs. All the fake, bravado-fueled confidence evaporated into the warm mountain air like smoke. That is completely impossible, Tristan stammered, shaking his head frantically, desperate to reject the crushing reality. You check people in at a Hyatt. You make 32 grand a year. You drive a beat-up Toyota. You don't have the capital. You are lying. This is some kind of massive sick prank. I haven't worked at the Hyatt in 6 years, Tristan, I replied, my tone conversational. I started a corporate consulting firm when I was 27. I saved every single penny, bought my first distressed asset in Sedona, completely flipped the valuation, pulled out the equity, and built an empire while you were busy playing golf on dad's dime and pretending to be a vice president of a company you don't even understand. My mother sat down heavily on the edge of her lounger. She looked physically dizzy, pressing her manicured fingers tightly to her temples. $110 million. She whispered to herself, the massive number echoing in her mind like a broken record. Oh, and speaking of the truth, I turned back to my brother, who was staring fixedly at the ground, wishing it would swallow him whole. Tristan, that incredibly exclusive $95,000 membership you were bragging about, I personally run the back-end analytics for the membership board. Your application sat in my pending pile for 20 months because your personal financials did not meet our baseline criteria. You rely entirely on your corporate salary and dad's business credit. You have zero liquid assets. The only reason you have that heavy metal card in your wallet right now is because my committee approved you 8 months ago to fill a demographic quota. We needed a few younger members to lower the median age of the club. You didn't skip the line, Tristan. You barely scraped over the absolute lowest threshold. Tristan let out a pathetic sound that was half groan, half sob. His friends exchanged brutal, mocking glances. The golden child had just been publicly exposed as a total fraud. But I wasn't finished. I had one final, devastating card to play. And Tristan, I continued, my voice echoing loudly off the cabana walls, that massive $60 million commercial development project you were just bragging about to your friends? The one that requires a shark mentality? Tristan looked up, his eyes wide with sheer terror, realizing that I somehow knew about that, too. The private equity firm you have been desperately courting for the last 3 months for a mezzanine loan to fund that acquisition, I said slowly, watching the blood completely drain from his face. The firm is called Obsidian Capital Management, correct? Tristan nodded weakly, unable to speak. I am the sole founder, CEO, and 100% equity owner of Obsidian Capital Management, I revealed, delivering the final, fatal blow. I read your heavily padded, borderline fraudulent prospectus last night in my office. Your math is entirely fictional. Your projected cap rates are absurd. I formally denied your funding application this morning. The email should be in your inbox right now. Your $60 million deal is completely dead in the water, Tristan, because you pitched it to the brother you spent your entire life mocking. Tristan buried his face in his hands. He was completely, utterly broken. My father finally found his voice. He stepped toward me, his face a complex, crumbling mask of shock, awe, and a desperate, frantic need to regain control of the family narrative. Elias, he said, his voice trembling slightly, attempting to sound authoritative but failing miserably. Why didn't you come to me if you were making massive moves in commercial real estate acquisitions? I could have guided you. We are family. We are thorns. We belong, in business, together. We could merge our portfolios. I stared at the man who had actively dismissed me, belittled me, and ignored me my entire life. I felt no anger. I just felt incredibly cold. When I was 22, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a surgical scalpel, I came into your office, I handed you my resume. I asked for a chance to sweep the floors at your firm. What did you say to me, Dad? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He swallowed hard. You told me I was too soft, I continued, absolutely refusing to let him off the hook. You told me the industry was for sharks and I was prey. You told me to set my expectations lower so I wouldn't end up a disappointed failure. And in the exact same breath, you handed Tristan a vice president title and a Mercedes despite his terrible grades. You didn't want to guide me. You wanted me out of your way. I was trying to protect you, my father pleaded, stepping closer, his hands shaking. The real estate world is vicious, Elias. I didn't think you had the stomach for it. You weren't protecting me, I fired back, my voice echoing loudly. You were actively telling me I wasn't good enough. You were insuring When I bought my first property in Sedona and risked everything I had, Mom called to tell me I was going to bankrupt myself and embarrass the family name. You actively rooted for my absolute failure. My mother started to cry, genuine tears ruining her expensive makeup. Elias, honey, please, we didn't mean it like that. We love you. We are so incredibly proud of you. Look at what you've built. You don't get to be proud of this. I said, gesturing broadly to the sprawling resort around me. You didn't build this. You didn't fund it. You didn't support it emotionally or financially. You meant every single comparison, every cruel dismissal, every time you celebrated Tristan's mediocre achievements and completely forgot to even ask if I was alive. Those were not accidents. Those were choices. I checked the heavy Rolex on my wrist. I have a massive resort to run, I said, turning away from them. You are all welcome to enjoy the rest of your stay. Tristan, your membership is currently valid, and your account is in good standing. Your final bill will be processed upon checkout on Sunday. The birthday dinner tonight is at 7 p.m. I have reserved the private dining room for you all to celebrate. You aren't coming to the dinner? My mother asked, her voice cracking with desperation. I won't be attending, I said over my shoulder, not breaking my stride. I have a conference call at 8 p.m. with my corporate legal team. I simply do not have time for family dinners. I walked away, leaving them standing in the absolute wreckage of their own shattered egos, the silence of their humiliation ringing in my ears. I didn't look back once. The fallout from the pool confrontation was swift and absolute. I was told by my front desk executive staff that Tristan and his 3 friends checked out of the executive villa before sunrise on Saturday morning. Tristan fled the property in his Mercedes, completely unable to face the resort staff, his judgmental friends, or the crushing, undeniable reality that his younger brother owned the very ground he walked on, and had personally killed his biggest career deal. My parents stayed until their scheduled Sunday checkout time, but they didn't use the infinity pool. They didn't book expensive spa treatments. They wandered the manicured, sprawling grounds of the resort like lost ghosts, finally seeing the physical, undeniable manifestation of the son they had thrown away. Sunday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk in my private owner's office. I was reviewing legal contracts when Sterling knocked gently on the heavy oak door. Sir, your father is waiting in the private reception area downstairs. He is respectfully requesting a brief meeting before he drives back to Denver. He says he will wait as long as necessary. I leaned back in my leather chair. Send him up, Sterling. A minute later, the heavy door opened. My father walked in slowly. The aggressive, domineering posture, the booming confidence, the shark-like arrogance, it was all completely gone. He looked incredibly tired. He stood in the center of the room, looking around at the vaulted ceilings and the massive mahogany desk I sat behind. This is an incredible office, Elias, he said quietly, his voice raspy. You have incredible vision, this whole place, it's a masterpiece. Thank you, I said, keeping my face blank and not offering him a seat. I wanted to apologize face to face, man to man, without your mother or your brother here to complicate things. I wanted to tell you that I was wrong. I was completely, fundamentally wrong about your potential, your drive, and your intelligence. I completely failed to see who you really were. Why? I asked simply. My father sighed, a heavy, rattling sound. Tristan was loud, he was aggressive. He demanded attention and resources, and I gave them to him because he reminded me of the sound, the men I fought against in the corporate world. You were quiet. You analyzed things deeply. You didn't demand my attention or fight for the spotlight, and I let that be an excuse. I convinced myself that because you didn't fight me aggressively for a seat at the table, you simply didn't deserve one. It was a catastrophic failure of leadership on my part, and a massive failure as a father. You gave Tristan the absolute benefit of the doubt for 25 years, I said, my voice calm but unyielding as steel. You funded his failures. You bought his executive titles. With me, you demanded absolute perfection just to get a single nod of acknowledgement, and when I asked for a chance to prove myself at the very bottom, you told me to lower my expectations so I wouldn't cry when I failed. I know, my father whispered, tears finally pooling in the corners of his aged eyes, and seeing what you built completely on your own, while I was pouring millions of dollars into a son who treats business like a country club game, it is the greatest regret of my life. I am so incredibly sorry, Elias. Is there any way we can fix this? Can we start over? Can we merge our companies? I looked at the man who had defined my entire worldview through his constant rejection. I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. The ghost that had haunted my ambition, the chip on my shoulder, was finally exorcised. We can't start over, Dad, I said honestly, shaking my head. You can't give me back my childhood. You can't undo the birthday dinners where you let Uncle Vance mock me while you smiled. You can't unwrite the history we share. I am not going to magically fold my highly profitable company into your firm to save your legacy. And I am not coming to Sunday dinners to play happy family for Mom's country club friends. My father nodded slowly, the tears finally spilling over his cheeks. He accepted the hollow's verdict. But, I continued, if you want to have a relationship with the man I am today, we can try to get coffee once a month in the city. No business talk. No Beatrice. No Tristan. Just you and me. We can see if there is absolutely anything left to salvage. That is my firm boundary. Take it or leave it. I will take it, he said immediately, his voice breaking. Thank you, Elias. He turned and walked slowly out of the office, closing the door quietly behind him. A month later, a massive feature article was published in a major financial journal detailing my aggressive acquisition strategy and the quiet, solitary empire I had built from $40,000 in savings. My phone exploded for 3 days straight. Beatrice sent me a pathetic, groveling text message asking if I needed a highly paid interior designer for my new properties. I blocked her number immediately. Tristan never reached out. I didn't expect him to. His entire fragile identity was built on being vastly superior to me, and that foundation had been permanently, publicly pulverized. That evening, I stood entirely alone on the sprawling private balcony of the owner's compound. The sun was setting over the Rocky Mountains, painting the expansive sky in violent, beautiful streaks of purple and gold. I held a glass of expensive bourbon, looking out over the meticulously manicured golf course, the glowing lights of the new thermal spa, and the bustling restaurants below. I had spent my entire youth starving for my family's approval. I had driven myself to the absolute brink of physical and mental exhaustion, trying to prove to them that I was worthy of a seat at their exclusive table. But as I stood there, watching the empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and absolute sheer will, I realized the greatest, most freeing truth of my life. Their cruel rejection was not a curse. It was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. If my father had handed me a junior analyst position at 22, I would have spent my entire life trapped in his shadow, fighting for scraps of his approval, suffocated by his massive ego. By locking me out in the cold, they forced me to build my own fire. They forced me to become a titan. I didn't need a seat at their table anymore. I owned the whole damn building.